Welcome to Life on Purpose, where we talk all things health, wellness, and living your life on your terms. I'm your host, Brandy Eilert. I'm a holistic health and wellness coach and creator of Brandy Eilert Wellness, where I help women with adrenal fatigue and chronic stress live a more holistic, purpose-filled life. You can find my content and services at wellness360coach.com/Brandy-Eilert. You can also find me at Brandy Eilert Holistic Wellness Coach on Facebook or Brandy Eilert Wellness Coach on Instagram. Now get ready to learn how to really live life on purpose. Welcome back to the Life on Purpose podcast and Happy New Year, guys. I guess it hasn't really gotten off to a great start. Honestly, I wanted to have some wisdom to share going into this new year and into this new era, but I just don't think any of us knows what to expect at this point. So all I will say is hang in there. I truly believe that sometimes things have to hit rock bottom before they can really, truly start to get better, but we shall see. So today I have a really great guest for you all. Evan DeMarco is a leading sports medicine scientist and nutrition expert, public speaker, and co-founder of Complete Human. He is also co-host of the Single Parents Daily podcast and a regular correspondent for NBCLX. As a scientist, he developed a vastly improved formula for prenatal vitamins delivered in liquid form, and today his patented alpha and omega is used in more than 25% of prenatal vitamins worldwide. Evan is also author of the new fully illustrated children's book, Mia and the Go Away Monster Spray, whose entire proceeds goes to Operation Underground Railroad, a nonprofit that assists governments around the world in the rescue of child sex trafficking victims. In this interview, we discuss all things natural health and then take a deep dive into the epidemic that plagues this country and beyond, child sex trafficking. All very intricate and complex topics, but here we go. Without further ado, here is my interview with Evan DeMarco. All right, Evan DeMarco, welcome to the Life on Purpose podcast. I'm so grateful you're here. I think we have a lot to dig into today. A lot.
Well, thanks for having me, Brandy.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So before we get started, because I have your bio here, and I mean, you've got some just amazing things that you have going on. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience and kind of who you are, what you do, what you're into?
Oh, geez. That's a long answer. So let me try to condense this as much as possible. So Evan DeMarco, I am the founder of Complete Human, which is a digital content platform, a consumer products division. I'm also the founder of Single Parents Daily, which is a digital content and podcast resource designed to help single parents, especially kind of in the immediate post-divorce era. I have been in the health and wellness space for over 15 years, developing close to 1,500 products in the dietary supplement space for almost $1 billion in sales. I've recently just kind of embarked on this journey of what I call biooptimization with my partner, Jana Breslin, where we're really looking at what is the emerging technology basis that allows us to truly optimize our lives, and really looking at it from a completely different position than both of us have looked at it in the past, which is this exterior kind of aesthetic, physical approach to health and wellness, and really starting with things like mental fortitude, and then getting into physical health based off of diagnostic testing, really focusing on spiritual abundance, and how do we actually take that kind of healthy, complete individual and allow that person to join a community that can help change the world. And I think, the social responsibility piece is something that we're really focused on in kind of this new world order where we need people to lead the way towards a better planet.
That's really interesting because, when we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, there is two different views on health and wellness. There's like the spiritual side, and then there's like the physical side. You were mentioning kind of the exterior, what we see on the outside as being healthy. So what you're alluding to is kind of this other piece. Is it something you can measure?
I think it's absolutely something you can measure. And I always use this time of year, and it's December 28th. We're getting close to the new year as kind of the paradigm or the model of how health fails all the time. So go to the gym when gyms are open on January 2nd, and what happens? It's packed. Everybody's got this New Year's resolution. There's a commitment. There's this palpable, energy of I want to change my life. Go back on March 1st, and it's the exact, it's the same old people from December, and all of those New Year's resolutions have failed. And why is that? We don't address the spiritual or the mental blocks that keep people from embarking on their own health and wellness. On top of that, we don't use the appropriate diagnostic tools to help people quantify how they begin a health and wellness journey. And so when we really kind of take a step back, modern Western medicine has failed people in the sense that go in, get your annual physical, they're going to look at your blood work, and they're going to look at those markers based off of your age. And they're going to say, okay, for your age, things are good or things are bad. But that's diagnostic data in a vacuum. So it doesn't really give us this comprehensive look at where we're at. We're not looking at mitochondrial function. We're not looking at microbiome. We're not looking at all of the other markers that can begin to allow us to chart this course towards optimal health. So when we can fix the mental blocks, we can use diagnostic testing to create protocols that allow someone to really embrace a physical health journey and then move them more into spiritual abundance, where they can start to pair all of these things together with an appropriate mindset, with an appropriate why, as we like to say it. Then we start to see real momentum.
Right. And I feel like, going back to, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, my health issues, and it's the complete reason that I got into doing the podcast and bringing people like you on, and becoming a certified coach and all of this stuff, is because I felt there was something wrong with me. And all of my doctors were telling me there's nothing wrong with you, because we drew this blood, we see everything's fine. There was no digging deeper. But when you're not healthy,
Mm-hmm.
when there's something wrong. And it's really easy to just say, okay, well, you're probably depressed, or you're probably, have anxiety, or you probably have da da da. But what you're talking about is digging deeper into these other, like, how's your gut doing? Like, what kind of diet, or what genes do you have that are playing a part in how your diet is affecting your body, or all of these other factors. And then once you can kind of get those things in line, then there's that other piece, your spiritual well-being, your mental well-being. What blocks do you have there that are blocking you physically? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing that you can tell me to convince me that those two things are not connected.
Oh, they're absolutely connected.
Right.
And I think those are the most intrinsically linked things in the universe. Our energetic self is connected to our physical self. And when we try to separate those, I think that's the beginning of disease.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, especially, and I don't have specific studies, but studies being done on the links of past traumas to your I guess probability or susceptibility or whatever to chronic disease later on in life. um there's all these links of, okay, if you aren't dealing with these past traumas or whatnot, then your likelihood of turning on or turning off certain genes and how it's
Mm-hmm.
going to affect you physically. It's all very fascinating, and I think that's what you're talking about a little bit too.
And that's epigenetics, right?
Right.
That's the fun conversation that we're having, because 10 years ago, when we first started to look at the human genome, we're going to say, okay, you've got a predisposition towards diabetes or cancer or depression or alcoholism. But now what we're recognizing is that the potential expression of our DNA is well within our control. And when we start to look at the RNA of the microbiome, when we start to look at our environment, our mindset, I mean, energy, vibrational energy is something we can quantify. When we look at a room full of people who are on Instagram, the vibrational energy of that room is so low. It is a cancer room. And I'm not being facetious. It's like that vibrational energy leads to chronic disease. When we take a look at people who are in meditation, when we take a look at people who are in gratitude, and we move out of those lower level vibrational energies, lust, greed, desire, all things that social media perpetuates. And we get into these higher vibrational energies of gratitude, love, abundance. Things absolutely change. And now we have this amazing scientific ability to quantify these things. What 20, 30 years ago was just woo-woo medicine now is science. And now we've got this cataclysmic pushback from Western medicine saying, well, okay, sure, you can quantify it, but now I need a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial with a power rating of 95 to see this. And then when we combine that with the standard of care implementation in the medical industry of 17 years before something becomes standard of care practice, there's absolutely no way that the emerging therapies will get to the average person if we allow modern Western medicine to be the disseminators of that.
And what's interesting is I think it's, at what point do you say, okay, this isn't working. What we're doing right now isn't working. Why not look at these things? Why not put these things into studies and actually quantify them and actually put the data out there? I mean, and I think that's what's most frustrating to me is that we're moving towards it, but not fast enough.
Yeah. And the funny pushback that we always hear from the medical community is it takes time. And my answer is we just put a vaccine through the system faster than Usain Bolt runs 100 meters. You're telling me that we can't do this with speed? So, the conventional pushbacks that we've gotten from the modern Western medical complex don't apply anymore. We know that we can move faster.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think people at this point are getting frustrated, especially with the prevalence of chronic disease. I mean, if you think about, I remember my mindset years ago where it was not a matter of if I will get cancer, it's a matter of when. So you create this kind of fear around getting disease because we're all getting disease. I mean, you there's nobody that can say they don't know somebody who's had cancer or a chronic autoimmune disease or what. I mean, it's so prevalent that it's a matter of not if but when.
Mhm.
And you get in that mindset of, okay, well, when are we going to stop saying, wow, this is a problem, and do something about it?
We've all heard the analogy of the frog in boiling water, right? You put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out, but you put a frog in cold water and slowly turn up the heat, and the frog will just sit there and boil to death. We are those frogs.
Yeah.
We've become so accustomed to how life is supposed to be that we've accepted that disease is an inevitability. We've accepted that I have to be sick and tired, that the way that I feel is just the way that I feel. And that's how we age, right? You go from, vibrant 20s, 30s, early 40s, and then you start to have that slow, inevitable decline. And then you spend the last X number of years of your life in misery. And you might be a little too young to remember this, but I always think of that scene from City Slickers where Billy Crystal is standing up in front of his kids' class talking about just how life happens. Like, no, that's not going to be the case. I always talk about living to be 150. And that's well within the scope of what we can do. And every single day that I'm alive, I want to be alive. I don't want to follow that, slowly walking around the mall looking for the ultimate soft yogurt.
Right. I think about before, so my chronic issues started during a pregnancy when I was 33 years old. And, from that point to discovering, my autoimmune issues, what, I went down the road of genetic testing. I found out my gene mutations. I found out, I had really high levels of certain heavy metals. I had really low levels of really essential nutrients and vitamins and all this other stuff. So from that point, and then working my way back up to feeling the way that I do now, and then thinking back to how I felt then, and even before, I'm like, I could have felt like that for years. I feel great now. And I don't think that we realize that we can feel great. you mentioned kind of like this, we're moving towards this decline and it's just accepted that this is how we're going to feel from now on. But I remember thinking at 33 years old, like, I can't fathom feeling like this for the rest of my life. And I refuse to do it.
And that's the job of our industry now, is to encourage people to recognize that they don't have to feel that way forever. If they don't feel alive, if they wake up in the morning and they say something's wrong, that's a problem, right? And it's up to us to empower people with knowledge, with education, with resources, to go out and find the people that can help support them figure out what that problem is, and then provide viable solutions, which most of the time are going to include lifestyle changes, right?
Yeah.
It's not go take this medication or take this supplement. It's how do you address the root problem, and how do you create the lifestyle change necessary so that you wake up every day ready to get out of bed, excited to be like, I'm alive and I'm going to embrace every day as though I'm a 25-year-old porn star.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That was just that was my analogy.
Energy, man.
Yeah, that kind of energy.
No, absolutely. And I think, like I said before, I think, we're headed that way. I really have hope that, from this point on, after we kind of get over the hump of the pandemic, whatever that means. And you know what? I'll go ahead and dive off the deep end here. And even with what's happening now with COVID-19 and the fear around that, even then, isn't there? I don't understand why we're not saying, okay, what can I do to prophylax this? What can I do to be in the best shape possible so that if I do get ill, it's not going to affect me detrimentally? Why are we not looking at it differently?
Because we're a lazy society. I look at kind of where we've come from, right? And we have to look at historical numbers. And I think one of the best numbers that we have is the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. If you look back 150 years, the average omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in the United States was about 4-1. 4 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3. And in that ratio, we're really good at resolving inflammation. Acute inflammation becomes chronic inflammation becomes disease. And when we can get out ahead of that, then we have a real chance for health and wellness. But through the Industrial Revolution, through the way that we've lived our lives, how we've become sedentary, how we've let, Velveeta cheese find a place on our shelves, all of those things have changed that ratio to an alarming 20 to 25 to 1 based off of the average American right now. That level of omega-6 in our diets is so hyper pro-inflammatory that our ability to combat inflammation before it becomes chronic disease is just gone. Now, why does the US have a disproportionate number of the deaths based off of population for COVID? And, intelligent people can argue about the way that we're quantifying or calculating these deaths. But at the end of the day, people are dying from this disease, from this virus. And that is because this disease, as all disease, impact obese or overweight people. So why is it that people aren't taking this opportunity to say, okay, this is the wake-up call. This is the wake-up call that we all need to say, that health is the most important shield against this virus. And let's acknowledge the fact that, yes, a lot of people have died from this, and that is completely tragic. We're not minimizing that, but the percentage of people dying are always comorbidity. It's diabetes, it's overweight, it's obese. So why are we not looking at that and saying things have to change? Why is it that I can buy a jar of Pringles for 99 cents, but organic produce costs me 10 times the amount of money? And there's no cost basis that dictates that should be the case. It doesn't cost that much more to grow that organic food than it does to, synthesize that,
create
that Pringle thing.
Food. Yeah.
So we've got to pull our heads out of our, and recognize that if we don't change, if we don't look at COVID as the gift that it is, and recognize that if we don't change the way that we live our lives, COVID-19 isn't that bad compared to what COVID-23 is going to be, or COVID-25, because it will happen again. And the people that are most resilient to that next evolution of this type of pandemic are going to be the ones that embrace true health and wellness, both spiritually and physically, and are well prepared in all ways to deal with that, versus the people who say, I'm binge watching Netflix tonight with my Pringles.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's why it frustrates me so much because, we in my house look at it very differently. It's not something that we necessarily fear. Obviously, we have caution around it. But there are things that we do that make us feel comfortable that if it were to happen, if it were to show up in our house, we're well prepared. And I feel like that there wouldn't be this mass hysteria, mass fear around it if more people felt as confident in their health as maybe we do. But again, it's my that's my getting up on my soapbox blurb.
No, and get up on your soapbox, shout it from the rooftops. I did an interview with a doctor who was really talking about how virus or vaccines work. And historically, if we look at flu vaccines, they are less effective on overweight and obese people. So now our entire future is resting on a new vaccine that we've shotgunned through the system that is predominantly targeted at overweight and obese people. Is this forces in opposition? Yes, it is. Now, does the technology change a little bit with this new vaccine over traditional flu vaccines? Yes. And so we can look at the evolving science and say that our scientists have done a great job of preparing this vaccine. But once again, we're leaving it up to science to solve our problems when the problems are easily solved by ourselves. Eating healthy, working out, understanding our unique diagnostic test, creating a spiritual path towards health and wellness, and creating a community where we focus on the severe problems that we face as a planet and fixing those. So a lot of the issues that we're seeing now don't exist.
Right. And I think what frustrates me about that in itself is it creating this false sense of security to where, okay, I'll get this vaccine, but then I don't have to actually still take care of myself. Is it that kind of like, all right, I've got it, but I can still go, like you said, eat Pringles and watch Netflix all day. And
it's absolutely creating that false sense of security.
Yeah. And
in that, we're eliminating the need for us to address the underlying issues, which is, it's unhealth, it's disease.
Absolutely. So I want to dive into some of the other things that you're up to that we actually didn't mention earlier. And that's that you are also an author.
Yes, or at least I pretend to be.
You pretend to be so far.
Yeah. The jury's still out on this one.
Yeah. Let's talk about the book that just came out. What, in October?
The first one, which one are we talking about? We've got a lot of books out.
Yeah. I guess, man, that was not in my notes. The Mia and the Go Away Monster Spray.
Yeah. So that actually launched December 7th.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was an interesting book. When my daughter was 4 years old, she discovered that there was a monster in her closet. And, I see you laughing on this one. And so I think any parent who's gone through this knows that it happens, right? Our kids have these irrational fears. And we know that as parents, we try to solve them with logic. You open up the closet door, you show them that there's no monster in there. And the second you close the door, the monster comes back. And so I didn't know what to do. I'm like, okay, how do I solve this problem? So let's use a little magic. So I took her downstairs. I took a clear bottle. I grabbed a bottle of lavender oil, and then we put some excipient, the lavender oil, and some food coloring in there. And here we go. And then I'm like, oh, we gotta go one step further. So I cut off a little piece of her hair, dropped it in the bottle. We shook it up, and I'm like, presto, you have your own magic go away monster spray. So took her upstairs, sprayed it all over her room. It's lavender, it's calming, but we really focused on creating this magic together on how do we solve the problem of getting the monster to go away. It wasn't that there isn't a monster. It's that the magic to make the monster go away exists within her. And it was an experience. And so I wanted to write this book as just a chronicle of that experience for us. And then at the beginning of 2020, I was supposed to run 100 miles, which I never recommend to anybody. That's just lunacy.
That sounds
Uh,
terrible.
yeah, that's just stupid. Running 24 miles is stupid. Running down the road is stupid.
You're
Anyway,
speaking my language right now.
yeah, I get around as nature intended in an airplane. Um, so I was supposed to run 100 miles to raise money and awareness for Operation Underground Railroad, which is a charity that focuses on extracting kids from sex trafficking rings around the world and then working with local governments to prosecute the offenders to make sure that they no longer create or have the ability to inflict these atrocities on kids. COVID kind of killed that 100-mile run. That's the only reason I'm thankful for COVID. And so I figured I wanted to do something. I wanted to still support this charity in any way that I could. So I published the book with the idea of trying to raise $2 million for Operation Underground Railroad. So 100% of the profits go back to this charity, and a portion of my own funds should we fall short of that number. But yeah, that's the plan. Is I want to end sex trafficking.
Now, how did that become something that you became passionate about and became really interested in? And how did you then become affiliated or want to support Operation Underground Railroad?
Yeah, great question. Before my daughter was born, I could watch movies like Taken, and I could look at those from the entertainment value. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great movie. Liam Neeson's a badass. And then I had a daughter, and then things change. I can't watch movies like that anymore. I can't expose myself to the idea that harm could befall my child. And in doing such, I started to see that there are patterns of this type of behavior outside of my circle, that there are these atrocities, that there are these absolutely horrible experiences that kids go through. And I just ultimately recognize that my duty as a father is to create a world where I never have to explain to my daughter that those real monsters exist. And I think my duty as a father is, even though that these are kids that I'll never see, I'll never meet, is to act like a father to all the kids. And I think that that's a parental responsibility that we have. When we have kids, we have to acknowledge that the world that we leave our kids has to be one that we're proud of. And there's no way that we can leave a world to our kids where this is acceptable behavior. Like this, to me, I'm passionate about ocean conservation. I'm passionate about saving the world. Those are things that I talk about all the time on Complete Human. But I think this is the biggest fundamental problem that we face as a species, that we've allowed the trafficking of children for sexual exploitation to become a business, a viable business on this planet. And we look at the Jeffrey Epsteins of the world, and we even look at like his girlfriend who participates in this. Why did we allow this? How did we get to a point where people were knowing that this behavior took place, put their head in the sand and said, oh, that's okay? And I abhor anybody who even could consider for 1 second that that's okay to do to a kid.
Right.
And then governments are, or go ahead, sorry.
I find it absolutely insane that this isn't the story of the century. Like, why is this not the thing that we're trying to fix right now? Why is this not all over every news channel in every country all the time? And why don't we hear more about it?
I think there's two reasons. One, it's the economics. It is a $100 billion annual business.
Disgusting.
It is beyond deplorable, but we as a species have a long history of this. The exploitation of other humans has long been one of the most lucrative businesses in the world. I was in Charleston earlier in the year taking a walking tour of Charleston, and there was, we walked past the old Charleston slave trade. And this was a building where we trafficked human beings. This has kind of been in our DNA. And so I think, one of the big things that we really need to reframe is how we view human life. So the monetary component is one thing, but then it's easy for parents to pretend that it doesn't exist, because if they do that, then they don't have to do anything about it. And if they pretend it doesn't exist, it's easy to just, that's in a different part of the world. That's not my problem. But the second that you actually acknowledge that it's a problem, and you don't do anything about it, you're still part of the problem.
Right. And I think that you're naive to think that it can't infiltrate your own sphere of being. If you're, quote unquote affluent, or you tend to think that this happens just to um people with less means or poverty stricken or whatever. But just the way that it can infiltrate your technology, your children's
Mm-hmm.
phones, their iPads, their computers, that kind of stuff, that terrifies me. I have 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. And my son, he'll be 13 in April, we just got him a phone. And it was something that, like, I was sick to my stomach thinking about it. Like, how am I going to control what he does, what he sees, everything? That was kind of my first thought, is that.
It's a gateway. It is kind of a gateway drug. And when we look at the percentage of people who are sex trafficked through technology, whether that's phones, games, gaming systems, a lot of it begins, and now a lot of it begins at home. And one of the reasons that we're seeing some of these numbers go up is because of the economic impact of COVID. People in desperation are, sex trafficking their kids, their nieces, their nephews. But the technology is a huge part of it. And I even go as far as this: the number of kids who are grabbed in department stores, rushed into a bathroom, changed into different clothes so that the security cameras can't catch that, and then ushered out the front door so rapidly, is alarming. And one of the big issues is because the parents are on their phones.
Yeah.
Sex traffickers look for parents who are completely oblivious to what's going on because they're walking around shopping, talking on the phone, scrolling through Instagram or Facebook. So one of the things that I tell people time and time again in all these interviews is your first step in stopping sex trafficking, whether that's of your own kid or anybody's kid, is anytime you're out in public, put the damn phone down.
Right.
I mean, honestly, the ability to be aware of what's going on around you has the potential to save lives. And can you imagine how guilty you would feel for the rest of your life if your child was taken while you were busy scrolling through Instagram at a Target? That would devastate you forever. And there's no excuse, right? We need a separation from technology anyway. And especially in public, we need to be hyper aware. That awareness is the one thing that's going to change the paradigm. Our war is a war of attrition against sex trafficking. And the way that we win that is to make it so that is no longer a profitable business. So when they can't exploit kids, when the sex traffickers can't get a hold of kids, through traditional means, it's going to change the paradigm. And that happens through awareness.
I read that online exploitation more than doubled during the first months of lockdown, and traffickers have found open roads and moving children during stages of global lockdowns. So not only, you and I talked a little bit about lockdowns in general before we started recording, but lockdowns as it relates to trafficking has been a huge problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has been. And again, it's kids are distance learning, right? Parents are trying to balance, working from home while supporting distance learning. And oftentimes what parents are returning to are digital devices to entertain kids while they're on their conference calls, while they're working. So when they're going to some of these gaming systems, to their phone or to, some of these places, that becomes ground zero for some of these perpetrators to connect with kids. And it's not in the typical way that you'd think sometimes. Sometimes it could be the person says, "Oh, you're so pretty. I'd like to, put you on TV, or I'd like to make you a model,"
Yeah.
playing to things that, and oftentimes that we all, it appeals to all of us, our ego, and kids fall victim to that same thing. So, one of the things that one of my biggest recommendations for parents is to employ or to implement this policy, and something that we do very well around our house. There's no such thing as secrets, only surprises.
Yeah.
And I tell my daughter all the time that if anyone ever asks you to keep a secret, you run and tell the first adult. Surprises are different. Surprises are birthday presents, they're Christmas presents. Those are things that eventually you're just holding on to that for a little bit until you get to surprise someone. But a secret is a very toxic thing. And so we need to be educating our kids that when these type of people are trying to lure kids into these, into these rings, they're going to say things like that. "Oh, we're going to make you a star, but you have to keep it a secret." And Like, no, tell your parents, tell your mom, tell your dad, tell anybody. And we have to open these lines of communication with our kids so that they feel that they have a voice in that relationship with their parents, that they can say, this person said, keep a secret.
And I find it interesting and sad both at the same time that we have to educate our children on not trusting. If you
Mm-hmm.
think about like you and I growing up, I don't ever remember not trusting the adults around me ever. And I feel like now you have to educate them to question everything, to like you said, not keep the secret if somebody's asking you to keep a secret. I don't remember growing up in a world like that, and it makes me really sad that that's the world that my children are growing up in. It's a very different world than I did.
Completely.
And it makes me sad sometimes. I mean, I know things change and each generation has their own issues, but this is one of those things where you're just like, what? Why? Who
Yeah.
would have ever thought that this would be a global issue and an issue that you have to educate your young children on? Like, who wants to have this talk with their children? I mean,
No.
you have a lot of like awkward talks with your kids, but never, not this. Who wants to talk about this? But you're right. It is something that you have to find age appropriate ways to discuss with them.
Yeah. And I think, again, there was a great social experiment that was done. And I think I saw this on social media. So the dichotomy of me bashing it while also using it as a learning tool does not go unnoticed. But it was the guy who went up to parents in a park and said, do you believe that with my puppy, I could get your kid to get into my van?
Yeah.
And all the parents are like, no, of course not. Every single kid got in the van.
Right.
And that's a scary thing, right? Because we have conditioned kids to trust the authority of adults. So how do you get kids to question that authority without becoming the disruptive butt heads in school? We are in a whole new world right now. There is so many things that we're trying to figure out as we go along, but I will gladly be that parent pulled into the principal's office, if it's every single day and said, your kid questioned this, if it means that my kid is safe.
Yeah. And I just had this thought too. It's interesting that we don't have, usually like wisdom is passed down, right? We learn from our parents how they parented us, and sometimes, we tweak it based on how well maybe we were parented or not. But this isn't something that our parents can help us with. They didn't
No.
grow up, with us on technology all the time. They didn't grow up with these rapid changes in technology. They didn't have to teach us. I mean, I don't even remember the idea of sex trafficking as a child. It wasn't, I mean, my mom had a fear of us getting like snatched in a department store, but it wasn't the thing that it is now.
No.
And so I think we're navigating this on the fly. I mean, who knows how to navigate it?
We don't. And we're just making it up as we go along. And that's why, the things that we can do, be proactive, be aware, put your phone away, make sure that you know where your kids are at, right? Like technology can be a good thing. And I remember when I was 6 years old, and like, I would just get on my bike and go. Like, we didn't have a cell phone. Like, I would be gone for hours at a time, and I'd just show up for dinner, and then that was it. Like,
same. Yeah.
we don't live in that world anymore. And so how do we use technology to make sure that our kids are safe while also utilizing that technology as a deterrent for the people that want to, traffic our kids? And so, yeah, it is a challenge. I highly recommend people go to Operation Underground Railroad. You can Google that, and there are a lot of resources out there. And I think, as we really have this conversation, the more that we can rely on the experts who are boots on the ground, who are working with these, to dismantle these sex trafficking rings, they're seeing firsthand how these kids get rolled into this. And so they've got some really good tips, some really good things that we need to be implementing as a society to make sure that they're not around in 10 years. And I jokingly say with the CEO of, or the founder of Operation Underground Road, is I want to put you out of business. And he loves that plan. So
exactly. I mean, who wants to, need that kind of organization around. But I want let's talk a little bit more in depth about Operation Underground Railroad. What is it? Who is it? Who's behind it? Kind of the details of that. What are they doing?
Yeah, so Tim Ballard is the founder, and Tim Ballard was an ex-CIA Department of Homeland Security officer who worked within trafficking. And what he found was he was getting major tips for trafficking outside of the US jurisdiction. So he would have to basically just do nothing while he knew that these kids were being trafficked in foreign countries because of, because of diplomacy or diplomatic, policy. So he basically just left. He said, "I can't do this anymore." He left. He stopped operation, or he started under Operation Underground Railroad. And his goal was to raise enough money so that he could work with local governments in these areas where he was getting tipped. So it's not a vigilante squad, but it is a group of people, predominantly ex-special forces, CIA operatives, guys who you don't want showing up on your doorstep, going into these areas and physically removing some of these kids while simultaneously working with local law enforcement to end these sex trafficking rings, to put these people behind bars.
Is this organization strictly domestic, or they work overseas as well?
They are domestic and international, so they will work everywhere. And
so they, by leaving these government organizations, they now are able to work both. Both outside. Okay, I gotcha. So why then, I guess my question, why they are making these extractions? Are people being arrested? Are people being prosecuted? What's the process then?
Yeah, and people are. And so oftentimes what they'll do is they'll set up these sting operations where, people will go in and they'll pretend to be, American tourists looking to buy kids for sexual pleasure. And, once that, basically it's a sting. And then once the seller of these kids, admits that I've got kids for something like that, then, local law enforcement will come in. They'll arrest, all the people within the ring. They'll extract the kids, and then the kids will be taken to rehabilitation centers to begin, what is really a lifelong process. And I've had the fortune and or misfortune of meeting some of the kids, who've gone through just some of these. I can't even begin to imagine, right? And half the time, it's hard for me to talk about. When you see someone who's had the experiences that these kids had, that it's never going to be an easy life after that. Intimacy, trust, so many of the things that I think so many people take for granted are almost gone. And I know that you can rebuild towards that, and they work towards rebuilding that, but there's always these elements where you've been exploited to the point where intimacy and trust no longer are natural, instinctual things that you feel. And that's a very hollow, empty place. And so many amazing organizations across the world really work with some of these kids to try to help, because getting them out is just step one. It's, getting them rehabilitated is step two. And I've met so many amazing people, so many incredibly passionate, amazing people who dedicate their lives towards helping these kids. And I love what they do, but I want to put them out of business too. I want to make sure that I never have to look at another kid and see that look in their eye, that look of I can't trust you. I don't know if you can see the look where they're like, will they ever trust another person again?
Right. I was just thinking while you were speaking, I wish that we had more of these stories. I wish that we as the general public heard that rescue is possible and that it is happening. I know we saw a couple instances this year alone. I know I remember seeing a couple in the news of rescues. How often is this happening, or do you even know?
Daily. The number of people in sex trafficking would blow your mind.
Yeah.
And, it's not 10, it's not 20, it's tens of millions of kids in the world. It's something that's unfathomable. And I say that thinking like, how do we get to a place where there's a demand for this? There's a demand for people to engage in sexual acts with minors, with kids. How do we get to a place where a wealthy businessman from the United States can leave the country or go to Jeffrey Epstein's island and participate in that. How did we get to a place where this is acceptable behavior? And then how do we get to a place where we're not willing to persecute these people as, I would say, war criminals, right? Like, I mean, we executed Saddam Hussein. Why would we not do the same with someone like this?
And
that's the
thing I can think of.
Yeah. And the ethics of what you do with people like this are a slippery slope. But I've had enough conversations about this where I think if someone gets to the point where they're willing to engage in this behavior, are they beyond repair? Have they crossed a line where they're no longer human?
I mean, it's strictly crimes against humanity. And again, back to my original question of why are we not creating more of an uproar around this as we are around other things? And I wonder if there was more of an anger around it, that more of us would be more willing to do something about it or help somehow.
You'd think, right? Like, put it this way. Take the money that you spend on your caramel macchiato, which you shouldn't be drinking anyway because it's so unhealthy, and give that to Operation Underground Railroad. If every person who went to Starbucks one day just did that, the difference that organization could make, right, it's demonstrable. But I think one of the things that we have seen is there is a very real element of social media censorship around this topic. People who have talked about it, people with significant audiences like Ashton Kutcher, like, Tony Robbins is, big supporter of this organization. They've actually noticed that when they talk about this, they're censored on social media.
So their viewership starts to go down when they start.
It's not even the viewership. It's that the social media, whether we call them algorithms or whether we call whatever we want to call it, is that Instagram and Facebook actually limits the amount of exposure those posts get. So when people with voices, people who have been passionate about this fight, like Ashton Kutcher, like Tony Robbins, are out there talking about it, they're being censored. And there's all of these conspiracy theories, right? Like, sex trafficking within Hollywood with all the big actors is prominent. I don't know. I have no idea. But what I do know is that if the traditional means of communication, especially in this world, social media, aren't getting it done, then, we got to go old school, bust out the rotary phone, talk to your neighbor, talk to your mailman, right, talk to every person you can, get on the phone and say like, hey, look, make a difference. Don't buy the caramel macchiato. Go to this website, donate, go to Amazon, buy my book. I mean, look.
Right. And that's where I was going to kind of wrap up too, is how can the everyday person like me help? Because, some of us don't have the gumption or the guts to really get down deep in the trenches and volunteer for these kinds of programs. I know I saw on the website there's ways to volunteer and there's ways to donate and all that stuff. I'll tell you, I volunteered with CASA for a couple years back in my 20s, and I started having children. I couldn't do it anymore. Mm-hmm. I just couldn't wrap my mind around the things that I was seeing go through the foster care system and the court systems and all this stuff. So I'm one of those people that I would fall to pieces. So how can like an everyday person like me help?
Again, it's a war of attrition, right? And when the resources of the good guys outweigh the resources of the bad guys, that's how we win. Yeah. And so I hate to break it down into something as callous as money, but that's what it takes. And so go to Operation Underground Railroad, donate $10, donate $100, donate $1,000, donate whatever you can. Like I said, buy my book. And that's one of those great things. Like I'm not making a dime off of this. I'm losing my shirt on it. And not that even matters, but what I want people to recognize is that 100% of the proceeds go to this. And, buy the book, buy 2 or 3 of the books, give them out to your kids, give them out to neighbors, and with that book, what the hope is that we start to recognize that there are methods from which people can participate in the conversation. I wrote the book to keep the fake monsters away. Now I hope that it can keep the real ones away.
Well, Evan, I think you're doing really great work, not only in the health and wellness space, but also working with an organization like Operation Underground Railroad. So I really appreciate you sharing your message, and hopefully it reaches the people that it needs to, and hopefully, we can start to make a change. I would love to see 2021 and beyond be um, facilitators of some really big change, not only in this country, but worldwide.
Yeah. Well, thank you for giving me a platform to talk about it. It's not
Oh,
a tough, or it's not an easy subject, but it's one we
no.
need to discuss.
Anything that's really tough to discuss is usually worth it. So, Evan, thank you so much again. I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.